So in terms of offshoring, so whichever countries in which it's easier for a Malaysian company to get important contracts for offshoring, these are the markets. UK, Benelux, Germany, USA, and I would add Switzerland. But although it's a small country, it's one of the richest and has a lot of things to do. On the other side, we have two other, let me say, parts which I've listed here, which are India and Asia in general, which are mature, but are mature in terms of offering services. So the domestic market is not as developed as the one of the Western countries, but they have very good services and a large set of offers to bring to the developed market. So by sure, if I look at which are your competitors in terms of offshoring, India, clearly, is the first one, but I would add also countries like Vietnam, where we see today a lot of offshoring, which is going to Vietnam from Europe and from Japan as well. There is one important thing, if you want to develop a good testing business, is that although the testing principles are more or less the same. This morning we had a talk from the Japanese professor, and he was talking about IoT, and he said, is testing different? Yes and no. He said, it's different because IoT has something specialty in terms of, for example, test environments, but in terms of, okay, it works now, thank you very much. But in terms of principle, in terms of techniques, it's always the same. And I can witness this because we as ISTQB, we have a so-called foundation testing module, which I would say it's mainly unchanged since 20 years. So the basic principle, the theory of testing techniques doesn't change, but there are a lot of changes in how things can be done, and things change a lot for each new technological trend that come out. For instance, in the last years, we had to adapt completely the testing processes to Agile. New methodology, new SDLC, new ways of doing testing. Then the last wave, which is the one which today in Europe is generating the highest, let's say, growth in terms of testing business, is mobile. Okay? Today, if I have to see which is a domain in which there is really a big explosion of testing activity, is mobile. Why? The reason is very simple, because mobile so far has been, to a large extent, a game. It was used for applications which are mainly for entertainment, so for which the quality, is important, but it's not vital. Now there are a lot of players, big players in the market, telco operators, but especially banks, which are bringing their services on mobile. So when you start to do mobile banking, when you start to do transactions, when you start to move money, then it comes a time in which the quality has to be at the right level. And so, just to give you an idea, today in Italy I'm managing a company of about 1,000 people, among which 600 are dedicated to testing, so a big proportion. And as far as mobile testing is concerned, if I look 1.5 years ago, we had 5 people dedicated to mobile testing. Today we have close to 100. So this is really a market which is booming, and that requires, from your side, to continuously study for new things, new solutions, new ways to bring services to your customer. Which, by the way, is very interesting, because it means that you're working in a market, in a domain, in which the foundation principles are the same, but there's always something new to learn that keeps our brain alive and young. Probably the next big topic will be big data, okay? Because on this part of business intelligence and analytics, again, we'll have to adapt our testing focus on new things. I mentioned before that in mobile applications, we didn't need a lot of testing until we brought onto the mobile things which were critical, business critical for the companies. You see the difference? If an application is not business critical, we don't care. If it is business critical, we have to do a lot of testing. So this is a very simple, but very easy and very important approach that you have to follow in order to prioritize your customers in terms of will this customer be interested in our testing services or not? It's the concept of risk. Because at the end of the day, what you have to remember is that testing is a risk reduction activities. Why do we do testing? Because we want to minimize the number of faults that will be in operation. We know that there is a basic principle in testing, and it is that exhaustive testing is impossible. We will never have enough time, enough resources, from a computational resource point of view, to cover 100% of the possible conditions of a possible test. Okay? So we know that even in the project with the highest budget dedicated to testing, we'll have something that has not been tested that we will discover when we are in production. So the goal of testing activities in any case is to try to reduce this number of anomalies to the larger extent. But, and I will show a curve you later on, the more testing we do, the more cost we have. So at the end of the day, testing is a risk management activity, and we have to find a balance between cost and result. So where is cost justified? Where, if we have a failure, we have a big problem. So the concept of risk is the basis to understand which are the markets in which testing is more required, and so where customers are more willing or are obliged, in some cases, to spend more money. We normally use a classification which is a very easy one, and that clusters our customers or our application in 4 classes. We call it class A, in which we say loss of human lives. So if we have a failure, a software failure, people can die. Then we have class B, in which we have huge economic losses. So the business of a company could be seriously affected. Revenues or margins or image on the market. Okay? Then we have class C, which is, let's say, economic loss but manageable, and class D, which is, okay, I've lost work which has been done, I have to redo it, but that's it. So if you really have to, if you can choose which are the companies that you have to address in order to propose them testing services, are clearly class A and class B, because these are the 2 clusters in which there is a positive spending approach by companies because they know they have to do it. There is a difference between class A and class B. It is that in class A, typically, you cannot decide how to do testing, how much testing to do or not to do. Because when you are in a domain which is safety critical, loss of human lives, almost all the domains have guidelines or rules to be followed. So if you work on a project of a US Department of Defense, of a DoD, you cannot choose, do I do this or I don't. You have a clear standard, let's say depending on the risk level of your software, you have to do this, and you have to do it. So in this case, what changes is the cost of resources. Because at the end of the day, you don't have a differential approach by suppliers. All the suppliers are required to do the same activities with more or less the same effort. So what changes is the cost of resources. The most interesting part is class B. In class B, and we will see some example, you have companies which have to spend a lot of money to test their system, but they are not constrained by a standard. I repeat, class A, and we will see an example, you have a standard, and you have to follow. In class B, you don't have a standard. So it's your choice. How many tests to do and which priority to give. I just give you an example. We were confronted recently with a bank in Italy, which decided to bring on the mobile channel all their applications that so far were accessible via browser. And they made a tender, and they said, okay, we have these 60 applications, and we want to test them on all the possible devices and all the possible test cases. And so they said in the tender, our computation is that we will need about 400,000 tests to cover. 400,000? So you must be mad. If you want to do 400,000 test cases, you will spend a fortune, and especially, you will never be ready for market, because you told us that you want to go to market, that you give us 1.5 months, 6 weeks for testing. How do you think we can do 400,000 test cases in 6 weeks? It's impossible. So, what we did was to define a test strategy. Okay, to say, what is the best way to reduce the number of tests, still keeping the coverage of the most important things. Now, I say it very easily. It took some time to make this strategy, but we reduced the number of test cases from 400,000 to 20,000. So we divided by 20. And the result was still good, and of course in this case the customer was very satisfied because the quality level was okay, but at the same time he had a significant saving with respect to what was expected to do. So let's recap a little bit what we find in Class A, loss of human lives. This is safety critical application that, as I told you, are typically regulated by domain-specific standards in terms of level and intensity of software testing. Let's be practical. What are these domains? Nuclear plants. Okay, I think that you would like that the software of nuclear plants is well tested. Avionics, so software on board of planes. Defense systems. Railway systems, so software on board on trains, and more automotive. Automotive is a very interesting market. Is there anybody here from the automotive domain? Car producing companies? No, okay, so I can be blunt and tell you that automotive car producing companies are quite ignorant from the point of view of testing. Why? Because so far, historically, they have managed most of the things mechanically. Recently, they have introduced software, but mainly from the point of view of the so-called infotainment, navigation systems, multimedia, blah, 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 blah. And these are things which are for fun. So if they have a failure, disappointing, but who cares at the end of the day? Okay? But let's now think of new models on which you have the automatic parking, or the fact that the car promises you that it will keep the distance from the previous car and so regulate the brake and the accelerator without human intervention. Or the future, which is now arriving, which is cars which are self-driving. In this case, we are really in safety domain, and we need to do a lot of testing, and these companies are not prepared at all. So when I go and talk with helicopter making companies, you don't have to explain them anything about testing. But I need this and this and this and this. When you go and talk with railway companies, the same. When you go and talk with Fiat, Volkswagen, Audi, it's greenfield. Okay? So this is something which I recommend you to touch, because these companies need a lot of testing and they're still immature in that. Another domain which is very interesting is medical devices with the impact on human life. Okay? Think about the machines for blood management, or the machine for taking exam in which you have radio emissions, or think of pacemakers. Okay? In this case, let me say that you kill one guy at a time. Let's say you kill a guy. Okay? In a railway system, you kill some hundreds in a while, but from a point of view of testing, is much like the same. So, in this case, typically what we are, our experience is that from 60 to 70 to 80% of the project budget is assigned to testing. Especially when we are testing not the first release of a system, but a new release. Okay, let's imagine, for example, in my company we were working a lot on helicopters. Okay, because in Italy we have one of the 2 or 3 worldwide leaders in helicopters making it. And anytime they have to make a little change, or let's say a partial change of a system, we have to retest everything. So the amount of regression testing is so big that you can easily go into 70–80% of the total project budget. So which are the standards which apply in these domains? For avionics and defense, we have the DoD standard, the American Department of Defense. In the railway domain, you have the CENELEC standards. And in the medical devices, you have the FDA standards, okay, which are normally used worldwide. For the automotive, we recently have a new standard, which is the ISO 226 something. So in this case, it's very important, if you want to address this market, that you become knowledgeable about this standard. Because when you enter, for instance, a pharmaceutical company, and you start talking about testing, say, what kind of testing do you do? People look at you and say, what? Because they don't use the term testing. They say computer system validation. It's the same, eh? No difference. But all these standards are their jargon, their terminology. So it's very important when entering this market to have the same terminology that the customers are used to use. So for instance, if you enter the medical devices pharma, they call about installation protocol, operational qualification, performance qualification. So it's really, let me say, a specific vocabulary, a specific glossary for each of these domains. In any case, well, I don't know what is the amount of industry that we have in Malaysia for this market, but be sure if the companies you are working for are planning to go for taking a part of the offshoring pie, as we were discussing this morning, these are markets that you have to think upon, going to US, going to Europe, and so on. By the way, I can also tell you that some years ago, there were some, let me say, these are also domains in which in some cases we have restrictions. So before being able to work on this project, you must get clearances. But this is especially true, so your company must have special qualifications. In some cases, people have to undergo a background investigation to check if they are eligible for that. This is especially true in military part, which today are still very much protected and tested, developed and tested in the country and not offshore. But this, I would say, today is just military, because all the other things, railway and planes and automotive, are outsourced everywhere. Just for you to say, I was very surprised 3 years ago when I followed as a consultant a tender for a very big avionic testing project that at the end, from US, that at the end was outsourced to Vietnam. Who would have wondered 20 years ago that a piece of software which is key on the flight, on the jets, military jets of US would have been tested in Vietnam. But now, this is the market. Let's go now to Class B. Okay, Class B is, as I told you, in my opinion, the most interesting part of the world, because also in terms of size of the market, Class B is enormous. Class A is very intensive, you have a lot of testing to do, but the number of companies in Class A you have seen are not many. Let's look now at Class B, and you see how many companies and services fall in Class B. First of all, in Class B, you find the telco infrastructure. Why? Because they are distributed in the large and systems that require a very high reliability. So the telecommunication infrastructure are systems which are very intensively tested. Okay? Because if you have a problem, for example, in a base station, which is the element which is, let's say, the basis of all the mobile networks, and you have distributed it worldwide. Okay, let's think about Huawei, let's think about Ericsson, let's think about Nokia, and you find a fault in it, and maybe you have to change a hardware part of it, you have millions of dollars to go and to make the substitution. The second part, which I would say is very, very important, is the telco operators' core processes. So we are no longer in the telco manufacturer, we are in the telco operators. So Vodafone, T-System, and companies like this, that have their core processes, which again, their system need to be running on a 7/24, must be very much reliable. Think about billing, provisioning, and these systems. And so, for testing services. Third class are e-commerce or other applications which are essential to the company business. More and more, we have companies which are living on software applications. Typical example, lastminute.com, okay, or booking.com. These are two companies for which we do testing. These are companies that, or Amazon, okay, these are companies that if they have a failure in their system, immediately they're losing money because they are no longer selling their things. So they must have an uptime, an availability time which is very high, okay, and performances as well. But don't think just that these cases of e-commerce based, but think more and more, you know what falls here? We'll find it later on, banks. And bank is the largest market in the world. And banks today are going that way because banks are moving their core businesses from branches. You remember some years ago you have to go to a bank to do whatever, to web, and now to mobile. So they are becoming more and more dependent on software. And there is a fact, and it is that banks like a lot to have their own systems. Okay, so each bank develops its own system, custom application. So in Italy, but I would say worldwide, the largest market for software development and for testing is banks.